Back. Yes, that's right. We're back to dealing with the skill challenge, the adventure challenge, the action scene, that thing that people like to engage in that doesn't really sort of fit into any sort of bracket that we're normally used to dealing with. So this is what this is all about today. And yes, its roots come from Dungeons and Dragons 4E, but I would say that it has its roots further back than that. But in terms of mechanical system, it was really 4E that sort of started to present it to people. Okay, I'm going to put up a poll. Feel free to take part in that poll. Today's going to be a little bit different. You can see the title says creating Indiana Jones style skill challenges. So what I've decided is, since some people were asking me, could I please give more examples? And this was in an edited version. I'm going to do a lot of example giving today. Normally we just build a skill challenge and I show you how to break it up. But maybe that's not the solution for today. Maybe I need to do it a different way. So I'm going to do it a different way today and we'll see how we go. I'll do my main presentation and then we'll cover the skill challenge with a different approach and we'll see how that goes. Okay, all right, let's get started, shall we? Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Weller and today I want to talk about role-playing games. Today it's all about that action scene. It's all about how you can deal with chases, how you can deal with escape, how you can deal with solving problems that aren't combat, that aren't really involving some sort of puzzle and aren't really involving some sort of social interaction. We certainly don't want to do research. No, it's the heart blood pumping stuff. It's the skill challenge. So Game Master Preparation, Lesson 7, Creating Skill Challenges. Now, skill challenges have been around for a while. They've been called various different things, but I'm going to cover it. This is not intended to be a 4E presentation. We're taking the 4E concept and we're bringing it forward into the future for those of you who are playing 5E or something else. Okay, so an overview for today. Why use skill challenges and where to get your ideas for that skill challenge. How to create a skill challenge, the player actions in a skill challenge, what will they look like, the skill challenge consequences, what are those going to be like as well, and then some miscellaneous recommendations, because I always like to cover miscellaneous recommendations. Now the overview for today is I will explain the creation process for a skill challenge, for a role-playing game. I will demonstrate that process in a small way but not in a large way, and I will allow you to practice. So I'm going to ask you some questions and get you to give me some feedback and we'll work our way through this. Okay, why use a skill challenge? A common question. So a common issue that you might come up with is that a skill challenge is actually trying to tell part of the story that you can't duplicate by another means. So a skill challenge tells part of the story or adventure, okay, whether you want to call it story or adventure, it doesn't matter, but it's more a cinematic manner. You're dealing with a cinematic action scene that's broader than something like combat mechanics or casting a single spell or making a single dice roll, because the skill challenge is not that. It's not about just that. Skill challenges are good for a couple of things. As I said, an action sequence. They are great for large-scale battles where you're not actually rolling dice and doing hit point damage, where you're dealing with troops and large squads. It's also extremely good for traps. Now, where do you get your inspiration for the concept of an action scene or a skill challenge? Well, the following movies, I would say, are top of my pops in terms of the things you want to look for. Something like Indiana Jones. There's lots of different things in Indiana Jones. Mission Impossible, believe it or not, Mission Impossible includes a lot of really cool ideas, mostly around chasing and escaping, but chasing primarily. James Bond. Surprisingly, there's a lot of stuff around James Bond as well, and also the Fast and the Furious series. Those movies also include a lot of different ideas. Now, of course, it's around cars a lot, so if you're not dealing with cars in your role-playing game, then you won't be using that, but you could use something else. It doesn't have to be a car. Some that I have not really mentioned in the past, but you could also use, and that is Tomb Raider. Now, Tomb Raider is really just a clone of Indiana Jones with a different sex, okay? But it still has the basic premise behind it Also, Jason Bourne, again, really just a duplication of James Bond and Mission Impossible, but it has a lot of chase stuff as well. And then, believe it or not, The Prince of Persia. Now, there is a game, Prince of Persia, but there's also a movie, and I think that's a good example too that you could utilize for your action sequence, your skill challenge. If the skill challenge doesn't have enough scenes or events to overcome, then it's best not used as a skill challenge. You need to adjust it. If all you're doing is one dice roll or doing one thing or dealing with one obstacle, it's not a skill challenge. A skill challenge is a sequence of events, a sequence of obstacles. Sometimes it's fine to just resolve a problem with a single dice roll or a dice roll mechanic of some kind, but don't call it a skill challenge. Next. Skill challenges don't work well as a combat encounter. We have mechanics for most games that deal with combat. So if you're going to do combat, don't bother making it a skill challenge. If you're trying to solve a puzzle, it's not a skill challenge. Okay, a puzzle has a different dynamic to it. Okay, it's much more versatile. Skill challenges have a very specific purpose. Social interactions. So communicating with an NPC, you don't need to duplicate that with mechanics. That's what dialogue is for. That's what understanding what the secret or motivation for an NPC is or a monster. Social interactions are better resolved by dialogue rather than dice mechanics or a procedural process, which is a skill challenge. And then researching, like you only need one person to really research in a library. Is it that exciting that you really need to turn it into a skill challenge? There's a bit of work involved in creating a skill challenge, so you don't need to worry about those sort of things. They don't work well. I've always found they work very poorly, in fact. Okay, now that we've covered that, how to create your skill challenge. What is the process? Well, we start with design your skill challenge with a series of narrative events or obstacles for the player character to overcome. Whether that is jumping over a rock, running through a tunnel, escaping from a collapsing building, it could be all sorts of different things. Okay. Define a clear goal for the whole skill challenge and each stage with a consequence for success and failure at each stage of the skill challenge. So clear goals for the whole skill challenge, clear goal and consequences, success and failure for each stage of your skill challenge. Next, involve everybody in the skill challenge. Now, the best way to do that if you're using dice rolling mechanics is a group check where everybody has to make a dice roll, and that combined results of all their dice rolls contribute to the success or failure of the skill challenge in that part of the skill challenge for that particular obstacle or event that's part of the skill challenge. Otherwise, you're just going to have a few players with a high attribute score or a ability score or a skill bonus, and they will dominate the entire thing. That's fun for them, I'm sure, but really, frankly, it's a poor example. I've experienced this sort of thing before. They are kind of rubbish. They really don't work well. They're very boring after a while. Don't have long skill challenges. I know it is tempting to have many different sequences, but do not do that, okay? There's only so much you need to do. So 3 or 4 group dice rolls or, okay, this is my recommendation, maximum of 4. But you could also have, don't view it as a dice roll mechanic or a dice roll test. It could just be 3 or 4 obstacles or events that will take place that they have to overcome. So keep your skill challenge short, not too long. Arrange different consequences for failing a step in the skill challenge and the overall skill challenge. This can be anything from losing fate points or hero points if you have that, action points if you're using them, health points, morale, hit points, hit dice, spells could be lost, gaining a condition, becoming exhausted, or you could use a story-related consequence of some kind. It doesn't always have to have a mechanical aspect. It might be something that just changes the way your adventure will roll in the future. Okay. Events or obstacles that could or will end your skill challenge, they should always be placed at the end of a skill challenge. And if you have anything that will end the skill challenge prematurely, okay, move it. Always should be positioned at the end of your skill challenge. Okay, so that is how you build it. Now we need to break down what the players can do. The player actions are by far the most important aspect of a skill challenge. And so how do they work? What you do is you explain that the players need to state the action their character takes, or the act, or what they're trying to do in terms of a task. They don't just pick an attribute, an ability, or a skill dice roll test to make. No. No, they actually use the narrative. You describe the situation, they describe what they do, you determine the appropriate way to figure out the result of that action. Okay? Always fall back to the narrative, never straight to dice mechanics or game mechanics of any kind. Try to use a different attribute, ability score, or skill modifier in your skill challenge. If you can break it up so it's not always being using the same thing over and over again, that's good. But you don't have to avoid using the same attribute, ability, or skill modifier in a sequence. If it makes sense to your story, your progression, your adventure, the narrative for the scene, the narrative for the sequence or action scene, then do it, okay? But if you can change it up, it's always good. Next, it's wise to allow a secondary attribute, ability, or skill dice test or dice roll test to gain advantage, disadvantage, potentially if you make don't do well, gaining benefits or penalties to the main group dice roll test. So if you're dealing with dice rolls and dice roll tests primarily with your skill challenge, okay, it's always good to find some way where you get an advantage, you could potentially get a disadvantage, benefits, penalties, things like that. Because that way you can include a wider range of potential attributes, abilities, and skills, but particularly knowledge, character knowledge, the things that they wouldn't generally know. You can bring in things that you would normally not engage in, okay, rather than just relying on the more physical attributes of your character. Skill challenges don't have to include an attribute, ability, or skill dice roll test necessarily. You don't actually have to do that. You don't have to use an attribute, ability, or skill dice roll test. You could also, even though that's the default, you could fall back and use something like a saving throw dice mechanic or an attack roll. In fact, it is possible to avoid attack rolls, saving throws, attribute, ability, and skill dice roll tests completely and have no dice rolling at all. This is where we lead into the next thing. This is where the skill challenge becomes far more exciting for you and for your players. Classes, race features, spells can be used. Magic items, clever ideas, the smart use of mundane equipment can result in automatic success or potentially replace the dice roll test for an individual and possibly part of the group test. Yes, that's right. We're not just rolling dice. We're not just looking at numbers. We can do a lot more than that. Be wary of players trying to get success for the whole group with a single high attribute, ability, or skill bonus. I've said this before, but some people will have their character built to be very, very good at one thing. And if they figure out that they can use their one thing to give them an advantage and be pretty much successful or a wild card and essentially get success for the entire group, they will do that. So you need to be very wary about designing your skill challenge where a single individual can ultimately overcome an entire sequence or obstacle. All right, now that we've done that, we've got our player character stuff, we need to deal with consequences. Skill challenges have a consequence. Now, we talked briefly about that, but there's a couple of things you need to know about the skill challenge consequence, and that is, don't be married to a skill challenge being failed overall with a set number of failed dice roll tests. Even though that is the usual method, in 4E that was the usual method. You had to succeed at a certain number of dice roll tests before you failed a certain number of dice roll tests. Although this seems like a good idea, it is not a particularly good idea. It will break the narrative. So avoid breaking the narrative of your action scenario, your skill challenge. If it breaks the narrative, there's something wrong with the mechanics that you're using, okay? And you will find occasionally with whatever you're designing that this concept will not work for you. You need to break it down into much smaller aspects, break it down into smaller pieces. if a player character chooses not to take part in your skill challenge, and sometimes people will, like, I don't know what to do, I'm not going to do anything, you count that as an automatic failure towards the individual test, okay, or individual trying to overcome that sequence or that event. And you also count it as an automatic failure towards when they do their group test. Okay? When I say the word test, what I really mean is whatever you're doing, whether it's a dice roll or you're using a special character ability or doing a particular action, it's really a test. You are trying to figure out how to resolve something. You're solving problems. So you don't take part, automatic failure. Set a target number or a difficulty class that makes sense for the characters, for their action, not for the character level. So when you're using dice rolling mechanics and you have to set that difficulty class or that target number, it's very tempting to make low-level characters have to hit low-level numbers and high-level characters to hit high-level numbers. But you don't need to worry about that. All you do is you think about the difficulty of the task and set the number appropriately based off your system. Some systems have a different progression in terms of their DC. With 5e, you're supposed to have a progression from 5 through to 30, and that's the scale, and that's all you get. But if you're playing in a different version, the scale will look different again. But you don't really need to use the number as a goal. Like, your character level is not quite so important. We have a different dial for figuring out how difficult to make the task, okay, in terms of its outcome. To ensure each stage of your skill challenge is fair and balanced, although skill challenges don't need to be fair and balanced, but if you are trying to make them fair and balanced, divide the character with the least maximum health or hit points by the number of scenes that inflict injuries. And that is how much health or hit points each stage should be reducing on average a player character by. So what does that actually mean? You take whichever character has the least number of hit points, their maximum hit points, you find the character, probably the wizard, their maximum number of hit points. You then look at how many scenes out of your 3 or 4 that you have will actually inflict an injury. In other words, potentially will inflict an injury if they fail that scene. So if I have 4 scenes, they all inflict injuries, I divide my hit points for my wizard. Say the wizard has 8 hit points, I divide it by 4, I get 2. That means that each part of my events, each event needs to do on average 2 hit points worth of damage. That's it. Very easy. It's pretty simple. Now, if you want a different way of looking at this, you can adjust the consequences of failure to reflect the party and the character level by using the trap damage severity by level table in the Dungeon Master Guide for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. It's on page 121. There's another way of doing it. It won't be quite as accurate as what I just described, but there's another way of doing it. And the last way you can adjust it to make sure that you're not causing too much strife and problems for your players, and that is, the skill challenge is too hard if the character with the least amount of maximum hit points or health would die if they fail every stage of your skill challenge. And that is considering average damage. So if you were to go through and figure out what the average damage is for every scene that sequence that potentially when it fails will do a certain number of hit points, and you add it all up and it would outright kill a character, not make them unconscious, who cares about that? But kill them, then you know that you made it too hard. Okay, all right, cool, we've got it. Now I always like to cover miscellaneous recommendations when I'm covering this. This is a topic which has been heavily modified from where it came from, so I need to explain a lot of stuff, and hopefully I haven't explained too much. My miscellaneous recommendations to you are this. Don't break the narrative of the scene or the action sequence you're presenting with your skill challenge. Okay? Whatever you do with your skill challenge, whatever you want to call it, whether you call it an action scene or an action challenge or an adventure challenge, don't break the narrative with game mechanics and dice rolling. Don't let players come up with a contrived rationale why they should be able to or might be able to use a particular skill or ability if it does not make sense. One of the biggest problems I find, particularly when you go back to 4E, is people will say, I'm going to use nature my nature skill to make a dice roll, and they come up with some ludicrous way that apparently they can contribute to the group by using their nature, and they're trying to jump over a pit, where nature in this case probably wouldn't be very helpful, other than to know that, okay, there are holes in nature. So you need to be very careful about how contrived the rationale might be in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So that's always better to ask them what they're trying to do rather than what skills or abilities they're going to use. Okay. If the skill challenge becomes a series of attribute, ability, or skill dice roll tests, then it's most likely going to be a very poor experience for a game master and player. Both of you will probably not find it very interesting. The best ones are a mutant combination of dice roll tests and the use of clever ideas, spells, various abilities. They usually work best. They will give you the best results. Avoid focusing on the mathematics of the game, because this will create a lot more work for you as a game master. If you only focus on what can be achieved by mathematics, you will forget that a role-playing game has unlimited options, so you need to consider some of the things that don't require mathematics. Players will come up with smart ideas. Allow player characters to actually succeed. When they come up with a smart idea, it's perfectly all right if the idea seems sound enough to not require a dice roll and simply give them automatic success. If they decide they're going to climb up a rope or up a cliff, and they have a grappling hook and they've tied knots into it and they've got a harness, there's no point really getting them to actually roll any dice to climb up the cliff. Their rope is easy enough to climb. They've got a harness they can't fall. The grappling hook's probably secure at the top. Just let it be. Okay, so that's everything I have for you today on the skill challenge. Lots of information. I know I've covered a lot of this in the past. We keep breaking this down into more and more pieces and doing more and more skill challenges. There's a lot already on Patreon. So I want to thank you for watching and listening. I want to thank my patrons who support me on Patreon so I can keep doing this. I want to be able to keep covering the concept of the skill challenge, the adventure challenge for you, so you can do more than just the standard combat, social interaction, puzzle, and trap. Although traps are always fun. Anyway, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Right, I'm not finished. So we are going to go through, since I normally what I do today is I sit down and I actually build a skill challenge and then I upload it onto Patreon. And last time I was working on a minecart roller coaster skill challenge taken from Indiana Jones, from the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie. Okay. Oh, was it Raiders of the Lost? No, it was Temple of Doom. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. There's a minecart scene, and we were actually duplicating that and trying to turn it into a skill challenge. And I was halfway through it, and I didn't finish it. So what I would like to do is, since somebody had mentioned to me last time that I didn't give enough examples of where you could get ideas from, I'm going to type into the chat and let you guys throw your ideas out there. And then I'm going to break down where you can get your ideas from. Because I think for some people they're still a bit confused about what the skill challenge should be used for. So let me just, yes. Do you like including action scenes for your players to overcome? Yes, 71%. Undecided, 14%. Just watching, 14%. Out of 7 votes. All right. Okay, so let me just type into the chat what I would like to sort of what I would like to push into your brain and see how you respond to it. And that is, what action scenes from the Indiana Jones movies could be used for a skill challenge? That is the question. that I'm going to present to you. Okay, what action scenes from the Indiana Jones movies could be used for a skill challenge? And so you're going to present some ideas, and I'm going to break down if it could be done or not, whether it's a good choice. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. I'm going to drink some water. I'm a little bit thirsty since I've been talking for almost 30 minutes. For those of you who are disappointed that we're not building a new skill challenge today, be patient. It'll come back round. It'll happen again. There is already, what, at least 8? We already have a whole bunch of stuff up there. Okay, Fred Huber, what do you got here? Now, I'm not sure what you're describing here, Fred. You're talking about a countdown puzzle. Again, I would say that a skill challenge does not make a good puzzle. You are better to use puzzle mechanics rather than skill challenge mechanics. Okay? It's a different thing. It's a different animal. I suppose you could say in some respects they are similar, but I've seen how Wally DM builds puzzles, and I don't think that the skill challenge fits into that very well at all as a design for an action scene. I think they work better as a they work better if you have a structure more designed for a puzzle. And I'm not really the person to talk about puzzles in the first place. Anyway, these type things help create a story. Yeah, so the skill challenge is really, I mean, whether you call it story, I know some people have an issue with the word story. The word story is just referring to really adventure, exploration, overcoming obstacles, dealing with problems, dealing with hazards. A lot of this all falls in the same place, basically. So Fred Huber is a patron. Thank you for being here. We have Pale Rider. Where's Short Round? Well, that's a good question. Maybe they should have brought Short Round back for the latest movie that they made for Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny. I haven't seen that movie. I would like to see it. I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know why so many people were sort of not very impressed by that movie. But I think the problem is when you have an action, when you have an action, and the same problem occurred with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the Indiana Jones. When your action hero is starting to get a bit on the old side, it's a bit hard to believe that they can pull off the things they're doing. You kind of got to let your characters age out of that kind of thing. And that's possibly why they don't do well, those last 2 movies. The Last Crusade should have been the last one. Anyway, Nacho Man, also a patron, thank you for being here. I wonder if Wizards of the Coast will bring back skill challenges for 5.5. I very much doubt it. I don't think that's something that they would do. One of the things I noticed is there are 2 books that they published. Wizards of the Coast published the Dungeon Master Guide for 4E and the Dungeon Master Guide 2 for 4E. And unfortunately, a lot of people did not read the second book. They only read the first book, or they didn't buy the second book, so they didn't understand that they revised how they were doing skill challenges. And on top of that, they went further. If you were to follow them on social media, the designers, when they were creating the skill challenge for 4E, they realized that the books did not actually cover everything they needed to say. And they would say, look, you kind of have to break all the rules for skill challenges. All the things we were telling you, they don't exactly work. You have to be far more flexible about how you approach them. Flexibility is paramount. If you want to have a good action scene, you have to be able to be flexible. It doesn't mean you have to come up with every possible solution, because you'll never be able to do that, but you certainly have to consider them. Okay, next. I'm currently building a skill challenge for a heist, the goldfish from Xanathar's lair. Interesting, Nacho. So tell me, Nacho, what is it that you're trying to do? And maybe we can help you build that today. I can give you some ideas of where you can go with this. It's a good example. So I like the idea of, since you're actually building one, maybe we can give you the tools you need. Remember, 3 or 4 scenes. What would they be? How are they linked together? Okay. And how do you engage everybody? Yep. Definitely if the players want to steal a fish and hold it hostage. Okay. Heisting a beholder lair is the hardest skill challenge I've ever built. Well, I'm not surprised. You're dealing with a heist for one thing. A heist has many moving parts. So trying to come up with the events that will actually occur that they have to deal with, that would be difficult. I would agree. So yeah. But the minions have a spare fish because Xanatha keeps killing them. So Xanatha checks the bowl and the fish is there again. Yeah, you could look. Kidnapping that fish probably won't mean very much because he's always going to want it with a spare one in there that somebody's replaced. So yeah, for sure. It's a switcheroo. They need to swap it with a undercover Harper agent. That is an awakened fish. Oh, you got to be kidding. So it's a swap. It's a swapperoo. Ah dear. Well, that's funny. What are we dealing with? Bowling balls. Oh yes. So for those of you who don't know, the Indiana Jones. So Raiders of the Lost Ark has that opening scene where Indiana Jones is trying to get the gold statue, and we made a skill challenge for that. So getting out of the room with the darts flying when he grabs the statue, we built that first scene as an event, as part of a skill challenge. It's part of the same thing. And then having to jump over the pit, we did that. Having to deal with the spider webs, getting through that. Having to deal with the boulder, we dealt with that as well. The spiked wall, when you pass through the light, we built that into our skill challenge. It had quite a few moving parts, I think maybe 5. It was very large. It's probably larger than it should have been, but I was trying to duplicate a scene from a movie to show you how it would work. So we took all of that and we built that into a skill challenge with various steps to it that you would go through. And yeah, so the boulder trap from Indiana Jones is a good example, and it's up on Patreon. Okay, Z's countdown thing is just messing with the players' innards. Oh, is it? You can't fail it except by continuously pushing the button, which means the doors never open. Okay, all right. I don't know if that's going to be very helpful to anybody. I tried to do the classic swap the statue scene with my museum heist. I left a MacGuffin in the museum that was the same size and weight as the object the PCs needed to steal. Okay. All right. Again, what you need to do is you need to think about if the ultimate goal, if your ultimate goal is in a heist is to do a switcheroo with a goldfish, you need to have a live goldfish. You need to be able to get it past all of the security, and you need to be able to switch it over, right? Escaping the lair will be the skill challenge. Okay, so that's easy, Nacho. If you go onto Patreon, you'll find the collapsing building. The collapsing building is an escape. It's a collapsing building in this case, but you don't have to have it be a collapsing building. It could be minions, Xanatha's minions chasing after them. It could be various doors closing in front of them that they have to get through, either breaking them down or finding a different path or getting through them before they close. So think of it in terms of that. What else would you potentially have? Ideas, Indiana, Prince of Persia. Yes, we can get there. Yep, throw some ideas out there. Prince of Persia had a whole bunch of ideas in the movie. So if we're escaping from Xanatha's lair and as a skill challenge, and you're using the collapsing building, you can also use elements of, maybe they activate all the traps. Suddenly there's traps going on off left, right, and center. Well, now we can use a dexterity saving throw, or we can use some dodging. Maybe they have to do some dodging. Maybe they need to have a shield. Maybe they need to put up some magical protection. Whatever will be necessary to avoid being injured or captured by these traps that are activating. So those are the sorts of things you might want to consider. And like I said, you don't really need to have any more than about 3 obstacles or 3 events to take place. Okay, now we're going to break down a lot more stuff around Indiana Jones style challenges. Indiana Jones is probably one of the best examples I can think of. But we'll deal with whatever ideas you throw up at me today. Okay, I like the Laura Croft swinging beam that needs to punch a key in the statue at exactly the right time. So yes, so for example, there was a lot. What's it? Andrea Jolie in the first Laura Croft movie, and you see this again in the games. The idea is you have to leap, so that there's your first problem. You have to get from one place to another. There's a long jump involved. Then you have to build up enough momentum to swing that thing. So there's a lot of physicality coming into this. Okay, so you've got a lot of physicality. Swinging it enough so that it will actually puncture the key, releasing the water, activating it so that you can actually get whatever the heck it is you're trying to grab, right? Grab the statue, grab whatever it is. But you can go further back than that in your skill challenge and think, well, I also have to find where the key is for my I've got a key, but there's a lock. There is some sort of keyhole or lock. And in the movie, it is like a pendulum. It's like a round artifact of some kind. And it fits into a lock. You have to find that. Finding that lock is part of your skill challenge. Build that into the front part of it. Does that make sense? You can use everything from an attack roll to a saving throw to an ability check or a skill check. And you can actually have mechanics for all of those covered just in case, depending on the situation. Does that make sense? Okay, next. What have I got here? Yes, I think maybe dodging Xanathar's rays would be a good one, but the problem is you're dealing with a magical ray, and magical rays are a bit hard to dodge, but you could certainly include an encounter with Xanathar. You can include a skill challenge and a fight together, but you still want to have the structure of your skill challenge mostly intact on its own, separate, and then you just run your combat over the top of that, and it's all got taking place at the same time, or it happens part way through the skill challenge and then you continue on, or it's at the end, you have your battle at the end. Probably not a good idea to have a battle at the beginning. Okay, a fight potentially can end everything, so you probably want to position it either in the middle or at the end. And you do not want it to be something that will, if you're having a fight and they fail, then they have to run. Yep, that would be, you got to remember, you don't want to end the skill challenge in the middle. Always end the skill challenge at the end. Does that make sense? Okay. Ideas for escaping the lair. Yep. What else have we got here? Nacho. It's a complicated lair with lots of traps and minions. So use your traps and your minions. And use your beholder eye rays. There's three things. Escape the minions that are chasing you. Get past the traps. There's your next one. And your eye beholder. I would make your beholder eye rays. That needs to be the last thing they deal with. Because that's probably potentially going to mean if they don't succeed, they don't escape, and they will have to fight. That ends your skill challenge. So stick that at the end. If they fail avoiding the beholder's eye rays, then you or even hiding from the beholder. Maybe they can hide from the beholder. That's the end sequence. That's how you would do it, Nacho. Fred, I like swapping the spells a beholder has. Yep. Well, you can, yeah. You were behind? No problems. Indiana skill check. Jumping out of a plane with a blown up raft. Yes, so absolutely. So Pale Rider makes another good example. What are you trying to do if you're in a plane and you're jumping from the plane and you have no parachute and you decide to use a blow up boat? It's ridiculous. I absolutely agree. I always saw that in the movie and thought that was one of the stupidest things I've ever seen. But if you were to use it, how would it look? Your skill challenge would have to look a particular way. 1, getting the thing out the door, moving it into position maybe is part of all of that. So getting it into position, out the door, coinciding everybody, that there's a making sure everybody's hanging on to it. Those are all very easy things. They can all be pushed together. So really getting out of the plane with the thing, that's one thing. You all work together to move it into position. It inflates just as you all leap out and you're all hanging on to it. That's just one event, one obstacle. What's another obstacle? Well, the descent as it falls. So as you are hanging on to this inflatable boat that's supposed to slow your fall and result in you not dying because you don't have parachutes, since we're jumping out of a plane without a parachute, a very bad idea. It's keeping it balanced, right? Keeping it balanced. Keeping it so it doesn't fall in the wrong direction. Doesn't want it to flip up on the other side and wind up with all the people landing first and the thing lands on top of them. That would be death, would it not? So the idea is keeping it balanced. So that is another obstacle, another event. I would say to you that after that, once it hits the ground and goes sliding down the mountainside, well, there's another event. You've now got to try to, how do you maneuver a boat when you don't have a paddle and you're sliding down a snowy ice mountain? Like, that's another event. Actually getting hold of the boat in the first place needs to be a very obvious thing. Because if they miss that, the plane crashes, they all die. You know what I mean? So there's an aspect to this that you really need to feed them the seed that the only way to get out is, since there's no parachutes and you don't have a fly spell and you don't have wings, you're going to have to use a inflatable boat. Okay? You're going to probably have to give them that. Don't make that part of the skill challenge. Don't have them trying to find the inflatable boat in the plane as it's crashing. Okay, that's probably not a great idea. But those other things, they can be turned into scenarios. Okay? Okay, what else do we have here that somebody has presented as potentially something we could turn into a skill challenge? A really good thing, and it's not related to Indiana Jones, but skiing down a mountainside, being pursued by villains with weapons, whether that be bows and arrows, crossbow, guns, whatever. This is very much a James Bond thing. That's a very good skill challenge. Do you know why? Lots of obstacles. Dodging rocks, leaping off encampments, having to weave through a forest or a grove of trees. Those are all obstacles. Those are your very basic sorts of things. If you can, you've got three different consequences, three different scenarios, three different obstacles when you're when you're skiing down a mountainside on snow, being chased by somebody else. It's very easy to build. It's very simple too. And you can do a little bit more of it. You go watch a few James Bond movies where there's skiing, and you'll probably notice there's a few other things that crop up. Some of them are a bit silly, but they can still work. Anyway, let's keep going. Indie SC, swapping out the gold idol for the sack of sand. So that in itself is probably not a skill challenge. It's activating the trap so that you have to escape. That makes the skill challenge. But getting a bag of sand, swapping it out, doesn't make a particularly good skill challenge, I would say, Pale Rider. But the events after triggering the trap that the idol is sitting on does make a good skill challenge. This is why I say traps are actually really good, because what you want to do is you want to build a trap that isn't, you fail once, you die instantly. What you do is you want to keep increasing the tension and the stakes and have things continue to move and change so that you have to keep responding and acting and doing stuff. And if you have a couple of steps, that gives you an opportunity with a way out. Does that make sense? What else have you got here? Fred Hooper's got down here, Whip versus the Swordsman. And Indy pulls out a pistol because Harrison Ford was sick and didn't want to deal with it. No, that doesn't make a very good skill challenge because there's only one person involved. But that's not the biggest problem. Really, a whip and a person with a sword, that is a fight. That's a combat. It's resolved better with combat mechanics. It's probably not resolved very well with a skill challenge. So I wouldn't use that. The last Indiana Jones movie was blah. Okay. I wouldn't pay to watch it. Well, that's a shame. I'm not really that surprised. Okay, keep going. Typo correction above. I'm sure there's something in it that could be used, but I haven't seen it. Nacho, I recently did my players' tavern opening as a skill challenge. Did you? I included drinking games and a dance off and a bar fight. So here's the thing, Nacho. Even though that doesn't sound like a very good skill challenge in terms of things happening, you actually have set, what you've done is you've set very specific criteria and events. So the tavern that you've built has got what? Your opening includes a drinking game. And the consequence of the drinking game is you could get drunk and become far worse at doing anything that requires coordination. And then a dance-off requires coordination, but of course, if you failed that first part, the drinking game, then you're going to suck at the dance-off, right? And then, of course, everything just goes pear-shaped at the end because we're in a tavern and everybody likes to have a bar fight. And the bar fight, really, in many respects, you don't even have to use it as a fight scene. What you're dealing with is more mass combat. What you're dealing with is just the repercussions of a big fight amongst lots of different people, not just the player characters and the tavern patrons, but all the tavern patrons fighting amongst themselves. So the bar fight is a bit more global in respect. So that can work. And it's smart to structure your bar fight at the end because, as I said, it's going to tend to bring everything to an end. Fights tend to do that. Hello, Phil. How you doing? Nice to have you here. Let the bard try to seduce the succubus and find out the hard way. So first of all, if only the bard is involved in seducing the succubus, it's not a skill challenge. It's just a face-off between what the bard wants to do and what the succubus wants to do. Try not to think of a skill challenge as something that an individual can succeed in, but the group must succeed in. So you have to build your scenario so that everybody has to be involved. That means not just the bard needs to seduce the succubus, every party member has to in some way seduce the succubus. Otherwise it really won't work very well. Again, it's another problem in that it's a dialogue. It's not an action sequence. Dialogues work best when there is a dialogue. That's why social interactions are probably better used with just dialogue. Game master, dungeon master, game master, player talk to each other, communicate, and you come to a resolution naturally that way rather than dice mechanics or skill challenges. I do not encourage people to use them. They're not a very good choice, unfortunately. The dance-off was fun. Okay, good to know, Nacho. A halfling challenged the player to Morris dancing while the bard was playing the fiddle. Okay, all right. Well, I suppose you could make the inflatable boat an ooze, but what would that achieve? Is that actually making the skill challenge better, or just making it more entertaining for you? Now, Cal-Rel, stagecoach chase is a very good idea. Now, do you remember in Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, he has to chase after a truck that has the Ark of the Covenant on it, and there's Germans on it, and he's riding a horse. His first task, okay, and what you want to do is instead of just having one person, you have the entire party on horses. Okay, you duplicate it that way. But the stagecoach is a really good example of this too. So I'm going to take your Cal-Rel, I'm going to take your stagecoach idea and I'm going to build on that idea. Horses racing after a wagon or a truck that has something on it. Your first task is you need to get the horse, it has to catch up with the wagon or the truck, right? Then getting from that horse onto the wagon or onto the truck is your next thing. Then it's getting rid of whoever's on the wagon or on the truck so you can take control of the wagon or truck. That's your last sequence. It's not a fight. You don't need to kill them. You just have to be able to knock them off. That's a different sort of kettle of fish. So you can actually include a whole group of individuals on horses, go up to the wagon, get onto the wagon, knock off the occupants that are controlling it, take control of it, and you've got yourself your chase. Okay. Now with a stagecoach, if you're going Old West, stagecoaches being run down by Indians, there's a few different things that you can deal with here, and we kind of did this with the mining cart. You can have a rock in the way that potentially you have to avoid. Okay, you might have a tight corner you have to take. You might have arrows or bullets that you need to avoid. You might have to deal with something like a horse losing the harness, not the harness, losing the oh gosh, what's it called? The reins, losing the reins. Suddenly the reins get pulled out of your hand. You now have to leap onto the horses and grab hold of the reins before they wind up dragged along the ground, because you can't control your stagecoach anymore. So that's another way of looking at it. Chases are very, very easy to turn into a skill challenge. They always have been. They're one of the easiest ones to do. Hello, Phil. Yeah, the pedestal dropping is a challenge. The boulder falling is a challenge. Jumping the pit is a challenge. So once you find the treasure, that's potentially a third step challenge. So yeah, I always break, when I think about that one, as I said, I broke it up into avoiding the darts. It's once you activate the trap, that's when we kick in our skill challenge. Getting through the room with the darts, getting past the wall of spikes, getting over the pit, dealing with outrunning the boulder, and then leaping through the opening. That's all sort of fair. Okay, next. Nacho. Yeah, the drinking game had a con save. Yep, which makes perfect sense. Which gave them advantage or disadvantage to the next challenge, which is the dance off, right? Yeah, exactly. Sailing a raft down a river with rapids and other obstacles. Now, Fred Huber is describing a skill challenge we made a little while ago. The River Wild is basically what I based that off. We included a waterfall at the end of the skill challenge. We had rocks you had to avoid. There was a whirlpool. There was a couple of different things going on here. All involved the entire group having to work on guiding that raft down the river and through the rapids without coming adrift. So yeah, you can certainly do that. Okay. Where's some water? If I run out, yes I have. I'm going to grab some more. Just give me a sec. There we go. Sorry people, I just need to refill. I'm talking a lot. I'm losing my voice. And I'm going to need to actually refill a little bit. And it's not going to be enough. I'm going to need another bottle. Well, I've only got 5 minutes. Will it really matter? Probably not. Okay. All right. Okay, so what is another example of something we can use that would be interesting? Let's think in terms of, if you think in terms of that sequence, and I think it's the Temple of Doom, where they're on the bridge. Now, the bridge scene is a good scene for a skill challenge. One, because you could include many individuals. In that scene, there are 3 people involved in that skill challenge, essentially. The first thing is, one, is hanging on and hopefully not coming off and falling into the drink and getting eaten by crocodiles when the rope bridge is cut, because you've got your cultists coming from each side. So that's your first step. Okay, you think of where is it going to take place? It's probably going to take place here. There's another approach you can think to that bridge, and that is maybe that was not the best solution in the first place, cutting the bridge. Landing a crashing airship. Now, the problem with landing a crashing airship, Skelmaz, is usually there's only one pilot. So if you're only dealing with a pilot, there's a problem, right? You have to have a airship or a ship that is crashing that involves multiple individuals to control the airship or the ship that is crashing, whether that be a spaceship or anything else. So you have to consider a couple of different things. If there's only one person involved, it won't make a very good skill challenge. Okay. So now I was talking about something before. Okay, so the bridge. So what you can have is you can have our main characters on the bridge. They are trapped on either side. They have to make a choice. What do they do? Now, they could obviously just decide they'll just try to fight them off. That's certainly one way of looking at it. Then you won't use a skill challenge. But if they choose to do something else radical, like cut the bridge or leap off the bridge into the drink, which is probably going to mean they're going to be fatally injured and then eaten by crocodiles. But cutting it is probably a good point. Okay, or breaking the bridge in some way. Well, then once it actually breaks, and if they're still on it, then it's clambering up the actual bridge that's left over and getting to the top. Doing that was going to be difficult because there's people in the way that are going to try to stop you. Some at the top, some at the bottom. That's always something to consider. Okay. The other thing you want to also consider, and that is the bridge is probably going to be a little bit worn out. So not only do we have the swinging bridge that's falling as it's been cut in half as our first sequence, our second sequence, minions or cultists trying to grab us and pull us off. That's another sequence. But also parts of the bridge are probably not very strong. They're probably going to be rotten. There'll be things that we grab onto. So we've got to be careful about that. That's our next sequence. Okay? Might even be more important is if we actually have another sequence where they have to get off the bridge and simply climb the cliff face. Climbing the cliff face is a really good example. And I would say climbing the cliff face or climbing the rope bridge or the wooden bridge itself is its own thing. Okay, you can have it structured a couple of different ways, but essentially it's the same thing. Olympic style games, yeah, to a certain degree they can be, but I don't. The problem is remember, Olympic style games are an individual sport. They don't really work that well for a skill challenge. Remember, a skill challenge is a group getting together. So I see Skellmaz has started to think about what I just said, and you're starting to see what I'm talking about. You need to build in different parts on the airship or the ship for it to work. So keeping up with an assembly line, making candies and putting them in boxes. Old I Love Lucy episode. Do we really want to build a skill challenge for that? Is it that exciting? I don't know. I watched I Love Lucy just like everybody else. Pentathlon. Again, a pentathlon is really individual, so it's not a group thing. No break between events. You're talking about Ironman competitions, aren't you? The origins of Olympics was demonstrating abilities useful in combat of the time. Yes, I'm sure they were. So Skellmaz, back to your airship or your crashing spaceship or whatever the heck you want to call it. Yes, restoring the engine. So somebody in the engineering needs to be doing something to restore the engine so you have control of the ship. That's great. But that's only one person doing that. The whole group can't be part of that process. So that means the most specialized person, the most skilled individual is doing that. This is one of the problems with something like this idea. This goes back to 4E and how they would run a skill challenge where everybody would do a different thing in it, but they're not all... Essentially, the only thing they're ever going to be doing if they're in engineering is actually dealing with the engineering and getting the engine back online. And then getting the passengers to safety can be done by a lot of different people. But again, it's not necessarily going to be done by everybody in the party. Finding a landing spot essentially is just a one-person task or a one individual person task. Like, it's just one person can do that. What I would say is if you can build a skill challenge where the first thing that goes wrong is the engines go out, and it takes more than just one individual in engineering to run there and put the engine back online, then you're potentially starting to have a skill challenge. If after that you have to get the passengers to safety into the lifeboats, and you have your crew, your player characters, all having to engage in that activity, then you got your second stage. Now, as for finding a landing spot, the last bit of it is probably the landing process. So if you've got somebody who has to do some piloting, so you've got one person tied up in the last part of your event, somebody who has to actually control and maneuver the ship, somebody else who has to navigate for them and actually find the landing spot. This is all part of the same sequence, would have different things going on all at once to actually contribute to it. This is the same event, not separate, okay? And this would be the last step. Then you could have somebody as well involved who's making sure that power is being brought back in line. So maybe there's a systems operator. You've got 3 people now involved, okay? No problems, Nacho Man. Go back to work. I totally understand. And the problem is how do you find a task for number 4 and number 5 if you have 5 players when you are actually just about to crash and land the ship? Does that make sense? That's a hard thing to come up with. Unless you're saying the only way they can control the ship is to have a co-pilot handle the controls along with the pilot, then well, now you get 4 players involved. Okay? Getting a 5th player involved if you've got 5 players is again a little bit more difficult, because what are they actually doing in that part of the sequence? Okay, next. The party created a human ladder to get over an obstacle. All right. Look, I'm going to get going, but I highly recommend have a think about a sequence or an action scene that you've seen in a movie, and then think about how to break it down. Can everybody be involved in every step of that sequence? If everybody can be involved in every step of that sequence, you're on the right track. Not only that, I want you to think about how many steps do I have? Do I have at least 3 steps? If I only have 1 step or 2 steps, it's probably not a skill challenge. Don't worry about making a skill challenge for it. But if I have 3 or 4 steps that I can use, then I potentially have enough to work with in terms of obstacles and tasks that need to be performed. You can have everyone spread out across the ship and do this simultaneously. Skill challenges don't need to happen in 6 seconds. No, they don't. That's true. But again, I'll make it very, very clear that my experience with skill challenges, running them as they were in 4E skill challenges were pretty shite. They really weren't very good. The only time they worked well is when everybody was involved in a particular obstacle that needed to be dealt with. And because otherwise what happens is, as I said before, you wind up with somebody who has a really good number in something, and they want to perform a task that is suited to their particular skills, which makes sense, but it's not exciting, because usually when you do that, they will always succeed. If everybody in your group, and you've got 4 or 5 players, only ever engages in the tasks that they're really good at, they will always succeed. That's it. It just is. That's what used to happen to me. So you need to incorporate things that some things they'll be good at, some things they won't be good at. So there's a chance of failure. It's not even about group failure. It's more about individual failure. Individual failure can be fun, because even if you have 1 or 2 individual failures, it doesn't mean that the whole thing falls apart on you. Anyway, I'm going to end this poll, and I'm going to get going. We'll come back to this in about 2.5 months. We'll cover skill challenges again. We will probably make another skill challenge. There's been a few suggestions here. I will, of course, have to finish off the minecart skill challenge or roller coaster ride that involves the group. I'll get that done at some point. So do you like including action scenes for players to overcome? Yes, 83%. Of course you do. It's a role-playing game. Role-playing games, you've got to have action scenes. Undecided, 8%. Just watching, 8%. 12 votes. Well, thank you very much for everybody who showed up today. I do appreciate it. I'm hoping that this was useful to you. I will make it clear. I want to make it clear. What I'm presenting to you is not the 4E skill challenge. Okay? I'm not presenting the 4E skill challenge. There are many flaws with the 4E skill challenge. What I'm presenting you with is my experience running skill challenges and adopting them into newer versions of Dungeons and Dragons, because that is what I've done. I've also used a different system even with 4E because I knew I had to, because there were problems that would occur. So a lot of different feedback from a lot of different areas. Okay, you can include this into other role-playing games. It doesn't have to just be D&D. Anyway, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening today. I do appreciate it. Really good to have you here. I want to say a huge thank you to all of my patrons who support me on Patreon so I can keep running this program. Game Master preparation is one of my most favorite things to run, and I think it's very, very useful to have additional tools. So I'm hoping that this is something I continue on because the support is there. I want to thank everybody who took part in the poll today, those of you who've been listening and watching, but particularly to the people who have been in chat. Okay, we cannot forget those of you who have actually been putting in comments. So, Skelmaz, thank you for being here. Nacho Man, thank you. Pale Rider, Fred Huber, thank you. Kyle Rowell, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Phil, for hanging out with us as well. Really good to have you here. And if I have missed anybody, I do apologize. It was certainly not my intention to miss you. I want to probably acknowledge everybody I can while I still can. Anyway, wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the or whether it be the morning, the night, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. Maybe try a skill challenge for once. You never know. Maybe you can figure out how to make it work. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.